tonight, the results of Election Day in the Holy Land, after Israelis head to the polls once again to vote for the Jewish state's next government. And here at home, a final campaign push, 1 week until the midterm elections that could upend the balance of power in Washington. Plus,
the threats wouldn't keep me from doing it because I get very patriotic about voting.
The coordinated effort to protect election integrity and nurture generation.
The Word of God says children are a blessing from the Lord.
Teaching others how to raise future generations for God. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. For the fifth time in 4 years, Israelis await the results of their parliamentary elections. Welcome to Faith Nation from our Washington studio. I'm John Jessup. Well, 1 week before Americans head to the polls for the 2022 midterm elections, voters in Israel have spoken. The results show Benjamin Netanyahu and his party coming out ahead with more than what he needs to form a coalition, but the tally is close. Israelis may still find themselves voting for a sixth time if neither of the top party blocs can form a majority. The election comes after a neck-and-neck race between the current Prime Minister, Yair Lapid, and former Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. Now, it's important to note Israelis vote for parties, not candidates. This time, more than 35 parties are competing for 120 parliamentary seats in the Knesset. To join the Knesset, a party must receive 3.25% of the votes. The leader of the party winning the most seats usually works then to form a majority coalition. Well, let's dive in a little deeper with the election results, turning to CBN News Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell from the Likud Party headquarters. Chris, first off, why don't you describe the mood there at the Likud Party headquarters, where it appears, based on preliminary results, that Benjamin Netanyahu has secured the magic number of 61 seats?
Well, John, they're going to be very happy here at Likud headquarters because three of the top TV stations, what happens at 10 o'clock local time, they come out with their results. Two of them have said that the possible Likud coalition would have 62 seats. One of them said 61. 61 is the number they need to reach to form a coalition government. So we're going to be seeing many of the Likud party members coming here in the next hours or so. We expect Benjamin Netanyahu in probably 2 or 3 hours to make a speech and perhaps celebrate what looks like, a Likud victory and the possibility that Benjamin Netanyahu could form the next coalition government here in Israel.
Chris, do these preliminary results at all come as a surprise to you, or even for Israeli voters?
Well, there was a sense earlier in the day, John, that there was a historic turnout, and that usually favors, maybe the right-leaning parties. It was also a surprisingly low turnout on the Arab vote. And those two factors made a lot of people think, well, maybe Benjamin Netanyahu could get over that 61 or 62 seats. We have to stress, John, that it is preliminary. Sometimes once the official vote comes, even the next 12 or 24 hours, things could change by one seat or another. We've seen that happen in the past where Likud looks like they were going to be able to form a coalition government. You wake up in the morning and the tally changes just slightly. So it still is narrow. It still is a possibility Israelis could be going to elections for the sixth time. But right now, it looks pretty good for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party.
Chris, there's this sense that no matter who they voted for, many Israelis told CBN News that they simply wanted a stable government and an end to what seems like this endless political paralysis. What was the biggest issue in this election?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is that they really don't want to have another election. 5 elections in the past 4 years is really something Israelis haven't been experiencing. In fact, I was interviewed by one of the Israeli networks, and they said, what do Americans think of us Israelis having so many elections? I told them that I think we feel their pain. But I think one of the themes was they don't want to have another election. Also, they wanted security. That was a factor in many of the Israelis voting today when we were out there at the polling stations. They all have their it's a very diverse political landscape here, John. But I think one of the themes was let's have a stable government, a secure government for much more than, say, a year or less.
You mentioned national security being another issue, I'm sure the economy. But, you know, Chris, I want to ask you in the minute or so that we have left, Israelis have got to seem to be, you know, marred by election fatigue by this point, voting for a fifth time in 4 years. Still, as we looked, early turnout was higher than expected and more than the past few years. How does early turnout affect these results?
Well, right now it looks like these results look like they're going to, you know, maybe stay for 12 or 24 hours. I would add, John, that, you know, it's important to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. I think that was one of the themes that we were sensing in our own bureau, that it's very important to be praying for Israel. Not only do they have external existential threats like a nuclear round, but there's been a lot of terror attacks in the last 48, 72 hours, which was a factor, we believe, that in the eventual results we see tonight. But it's really important for believers around the world continue to pray for Israel and pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and that they could have a stable government as they face all these threats, both internal and external.
Right. Chris Mitchell reporting from Jerusalem, thank you so much, and we look forward to you keeping us up to speed. Well, here in the United States, Election Day is 7 days away with early voting already underway. Voters ultimately deciding whether Democrats retain the gavel or Republicans wrest control of both the House and the Senate. The GOP need to pick up just one seat next Tuesday to gain control of the upper chamber. Now, both parties are rolling out former presidential star power to make the final campaign pitch. Former President Barack Obama hitting the trail for Democrats in 3 battleground states in a final bid to shore up the party's chances to keep control, as former President Donald Trump makes the case for Republicans in 4 states this week, zeroing in on the economy and energy prices. Well, joining us now is CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, President Biden will cast his vote this weekend alongside his 18-year-old granddaughter who will be voting for the first time. The president said this election is not a referendum, but a choice between different visions for the country. The question, David, is do you think voters see it that way?
Yeah, John, they don't. And once again, I keep saying this line, but it's true. Don't take my word for it. Poll after poll after poll. We have seen this now for at least 6 months. It just doesn't get any better for the Democrats. They had that bit of a spike after Roe was overturned in the summer. But after that, it started to dip again. And why? Because it's all about the economy, inflation, prices, all of that. And so voters don't see it that way as much as the Biden administration wants them to see it that way. And then you ask the big question, John, here, which is this. What's the Democrats' closing argument exactly? And well, let's just wait. Shall we have some silence here? What is it? I don't know. I mean, when you have a bad economy and things are just not going well for you, no matter what, you have no closing argument. And I think that's the problem. They've been really struggling with not just messaging, but the policy, put them together, and it's not good.
Well, when you talk about closing argument, you know, we're running out of time. There's just 1 week to go, and new polling shows the Arizona Senate race nearly tied. It's also down to the wire in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. David, with races this close, do you think we'll know the makeup of the Senate and who gets the gavel by next Tuesday night?
Tuesday night, no. Wednesday morning, possibly. I mean, Georgia could go to a runoff, as we've talked about, and a lot of these other races are expected to be close. Having said that, John, look, if the red wave materializes, and what does that mean? We can get into that in a moment. But if it's really bad for Democrats, then we very well could know Wednesday morning. I still don't think we're going to know Tuesday night about the control of the Senate. I do think we'll probably know something about the House come late Tuesday night or definitely Wednesday morning. But what does a red wave mean? I think we need to be clear on this, and maybe we'll get into this as well. But if it's under 20 seats, it's probably not going to be considered a red wave. It'll be a good night for Republicans. If it's between 20 and 50, it's definitely a red wave. And there is talk now potentially of the Republicans picking up potentially 50 seats. That's huge. I mean, most of the political prognosticators say about 20, 25, but 50. Could you imagine that on election night? That's what we'll be watching.
Senator Ted Cruz recently just said at a campaign that it is going to be a red tsunami. We'll just have to wait and see. David Brody, thank you as always for your time and your insights.
You bet. Thanks, John.
Well, a quick programming note. You can watch CBN News for live team coverage election night, either on the CBN News Channel or the CBN News app next Tuesday evening, November 8th, from 8 to midnight Eastern Time. We hope you join us. Well, high alert ahead of the midterms, the security threat at polling places, and what's being done to protect your vote. Next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. An arraignment hearing this afternoon for the man who attacked Speaker Pelosi's husband in the couple's San Francisco home. The suspect, David DePape, faces life in prison from state and federal charges ranging from attempted murder and residential burglary to assault with a deadly weapon and elder abuse after last week's attack on Paul Pelosi, who was said to be awake and coherent. DePape also faces federal charges, including assault of an immediate family member of a U.S. official and attempted kidnapping of a U.S. official. Well, it's not just those in public office who face peril. Election workers are also barraged with potential dangers, including threats to put a bullet in their head. These troubling messages have turned polling booths into high-security areas, resulting in some election offices installing bulletproof glass and Kevlar-fortified walls. CBN's Caitlin Burke takes a look at what's being done to secure the integrity of the election and to protect the people at the polls.
From the equipment in your local polling place to high-level threat assessments from America's top cyber command, a coordinated effort is underway to protect the 2022 elections. Chris Krebs, former head of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, recently tweeted his 4 main election concerns. They include continued efforts to delegitimize the 2020 election, threats against poll workers, radicalized poll workers as insider threats, and foreign actors exploiting domestic narratives. Krebs expanded on the insider threats issue recently to CBS News.
They're posing a risk we've seen in Mesa County, Colorado, Coffee County, Georgia, Antrim County, Michigan, where workers have allowed access by unauthorized people into the system and access to equipment.
Some state officials point out that while these breaches are serious, they don't necessarily jeopardize the entire system. They do, however, undermine public confidence, so officials hope to limit the threat by allowing fewer people access to election equipment. Earlier this month, the FBI and CISA issued a warning about a more familiar threat, foreign interference. The alert stating it's likely that foreign actors will intensify attempts to influence the midterms by spreading disinformation.
More, plagiarizing domestic issues and driving wedges into the discourse here in the U.S. Probably not manufacturing new narratives or anything like that, but instead really hitting on the issues that we're already talking about here and just making them that much more heated.
And the main issue those adversaries are focusing on is that the American election process can't be trusted, spreading claims about compromised election infrastructure or the hacking of voter information.
We hope to make this the most transparent election ever.
In Maricopa County, Arizona, the country's second largest voting jurisdiction, election officials are working to head off false election information by keeping the public informed.
Everything from an enhanced ballot tracking system to a redesigned website.
County Recorder Stephen Richer says showing people how the election process works is one of the best ways to provide confidence their vote is secure.
Showing that it's Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians working together, that it's a system that has checks at every step. It's a system that is documented at every step. It's a system that has no one fail point. It's a system that would be incredibly hard to manipulate.
Still, Richard says he's alarmed at the number of people who don't care to seek out the truth. A recent Axios poll found that nearly 4 out of 10 Republicans and 1 in 4 Democrats say they'll blame election fraud if their party doesn't win control of Congress. In 2020, fraud allegations led to cases of violence against election officials and volunteers, with threats pouring in ever since. The Justice Department reports investigating more than 1,000 messages sent to election workers over the last 2 years, including more than 100 that could warrant prosecution.
Some of the threats are real, we're going to hang you. I hope somebody puts a bullet in your head, that kind of thing. So it's unnerving. It's unnerving.
Ahead of the 2022 midterms, protection of these workers is a major concern and a top priority.
We've done everything from put up new fences to bring in more security personnel, to have more cameras, to tighter controls on badge access.
In Colorado, a new law prohibits firearms in polling places or within 100 feet of a ballot drop box. In Flagstaff, Arizona, one election office has installed bulletproof glass, and Kevlar-fortified walls will protect an election office in Tallahassee, Florida. The federal government has also offered various de-escalation trainings to state and local officials in an effort to avoid violence at the polls. Dawn Gobe has been a poll worker in Virginia for the last 5 years. This year, her training packet included several pages on what to do if she's threatened. Still, she sees her role as a duty.
The threats wouldn't keep me from doing it because I get very patriotic about voting.
States going through audits, recounts, and election disputes in 2020 have received the largest number of threats against officials. The FBI believes the same will be true following the midterms. These threats against election workers is also leading to significant turnover, which could exacerbate the problem of insider threats. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Caitlin. Coming up, Nurture Generation. How one couple is passing down a program to help parents sow seeds of faith in their children. Five children in 6 years. That means Michael and Candy Pooter certainly know a thing or two about raising a family. They're now passing their knowledge on to young parents through a program called Nurture Generation. As Brody Carter explains, it's based on a strong foundation of faith.
She just stood out. That's amazing. She stood out so much.
After 33 years of marriage, Michael Pooter still remembers the day he met his wife, Candy, for the first time at a church Bible study.
She walked in a royal blue jacket, coat.
Full length.
It was full length all the way down. She walked in with a little well-worn Bible in her hand, and I just went, she's beautiful.
As they began their life together, the Pooters wanted to know how to make love last and how to honor God with it.
You know, one of the things we began looking at is what does God want us to look like as a family?
Well, and how does he nurture us?
How does he train us from being an infant Christian and bring us all the way through that childhood growth to maturity? And we began to lay out a vision for our kids.
After having 5 children in 6 years, Michael and Candy found no playbook in the Bible prepping parents for sleepless nights, temper tantrums, and the overall stress that accompanies family life.
When we were having issues with our children, and you can only discipline so much before you're pulling out your hair, and you cry out to God and say, God, what in the world is going on here?
They found their answers by calling his name.
And we just started crying out to the Lord, and God started showing us what we needed to do to organize our house and to train our children. One of the things God showed us from the get-go was that God is a God of order, and he is very organized and he is very calculated.
Through diligent prayer, Candy says the Lord gave them a 30-year vision for each of their 5 children, one that nurtured them using biblical principles. Candy says it blossomed from simply writing down their desire for the children's temperament.
Children are a gift to us from God, and what we do with them is our gift back to him. And we wanted to give God a really good gift. We wanted to give him children that were healthy, that were educated, that could worship him, that knew the word, that would obey him.
Over the years, they experienced God's blessing on their family and found if nurtured with biblical discipline, that blessing becomes generational. Today, the couple is teaching others how to raise future generations for God.
Nurture Generation is a vision to see a man and a woman, husband and wife, come together whole, made whole, and then for them to raise healthy, godly families. So thank you for joining us here at Nurture Generation.
They started the program in August in hopes it will become a resource for the church. Nurture Generation shares training and education for parents on how to approach everyday issues from a faith-based perspective.
We've done more parenting to our kids when they're in their 20s than I think we did all along, because they have lots of questions and they're walking through life, and they want someone to talk to, somebody that can mentor them through the hard things of life.
Their content provides lessons in inner healing, deliverance, and training on basic biblical principles.
Well, it does no good to try and fix a child when the parents are still broken.
As the Pewters expand, they plan a podcast and hosting church conferences with hands-on training.
The Word of God says children are a blessing from the Lord, and yet we treat them like they're a curse. And we want to change that. We want to change that element in the family and in our country.
While there's no such thing as a perfect family, the Pewters believe that you can experience a similar blessing too, saying it starts with intentionally working on your marriage and then feeding your faith so you can show your children what it looks like to walk with God. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Great story and a beautiful family. Thanks, Brody. Coming up, trick or treat. We'll explain the sonic booms heard around Florida this morning when we return.
I am Region's first ROTC graduate student.
And finally tonight, the world's biggest operational rocket launch provided an extra treat the morning after Halloween. SpaceX launched its Falcon Heavy rocket Tuesday morning for the first time in more than 3 years. The mega rocket blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center in dense fog, carrying a classified payload for the U.S. Space Force. Less than 10 minutes after liftoff, the rocket boosters returned to Earth, sending a double sonic boom that could be heard near and far around the Space Center. The successful launch marks the 4th flight of a Falcon Heavy rocket and SpaceX's 50th launch this year, the equivalent to 1 orbital launch every 6 days. The next one is scheduled for December, when SpaceX will send its Starship rocket into orbit for the first time, and we'll all be watching. Well, thanks so much for watching Faith Nation tonight. We hope to see you right back here tomorrow.